So, welcome everybody. Very nice to see so many people interested in the web APIs and the cool modern topics. Today we will talk about browser APIs and see how these APIs can help us to close the feature gap between web applications and native apps. The main goal of these APIs that we will see today is indeed to be able to create web applications with new functionality that so far were possible only through native apps, nowadays with these APIs it's possible on the other side to create new and unique functionalities for our users. I will show you, of course, the code behind these APIs, but I will try to keep all the presentation quite engaging and dynamic, so we will see a lot of demos. And my main goal is to show you how we can use in a practical scenario these APIs in your projects. The idea is to stimulate your creativity and curiosity and see what we can do today with these APIs. Now, if looking at the picture, you might think or wonder whether we can launch a space rocket to the space with our browser. Well, the answer is not completely, or at least I would not try it with Safari. But that said, we went, or JavaScript went to the space. This that you can see is the Dragon 2 console using Chromium, JavaScript, and C++ for the touch commands. The Dragon is the first spacecraft with touch screens. Indeed, if you look at it, it's quite a different image from at least I have in my mind with the space shuttle with 1,000 of hardware buttons. The interface makes extensive use of web components and the custom reactive framework. Of course, you can see in the middle, we still have some hardware commands for the most critical operation. This is good. You don't want it to be out there in the space and having a conflict with the z-index property, and then it could be some problem. But for your projects, even though you don't plan to go over the space, this doesn't mean that we cannot use very cool JavaScript APIs in our projects. Before proceeding further, just a couple of words about me. My name is Francesco Leardini. I work as a senior consultant for Trivadis, an IT consultancy company based in Switzerland. But probably, as you might already have guessed, I'm from Italy, even though I'm based there. And you might have guessed not only from the way I move my hands, I'm so happy to be here in person and not just in my room remote, because I can freely move my hands. And of course, by my perfect Oxford accent, you might have guessed that too. I work as a full-stack engineer, having on the back-end side the C# and .NET as a technology, so not really Java, but I'm very keen in exploring and playing around with the JavaScript, modern web frameworks like Angular and progressive web apps, for example. But enough about me. Let's start our APIs journey. The first API we will see is called page visibility. It allows us to intercept events that we can listen to in order to detect whether a document object is visible or hidden. This could be very convenient in many cases when we want to be sure to let our logic run or so, but only when the user really is actively seeing the page, or the page at least is visible. We can think about, for example, a carousel. We want to provide a carousel with some sales, marketing campaign objects, and then this carousel doesn't have to switch to the next product unless the user is actively seeing that. That means that if a new tab is open and the focus is on that one, or the page is minimized, we can detect this and let the carousel stop. Another possible scenario is think about a client application that regularly has to pull fresh data from the server. We want to optimize the bandwidth, so we want to stop the client from pulling the server unless the user is really having the page in front of himself or herself. For this, let's see our first demo. This is the application we will use. for just convenience, I made it with Angular and Angular material, but this absolutely doesn't have to be a condition. You can use all these APIs with any kind of framework, Vue.js, React, or even plain vanilla JavaScript. Every of these APIs will work no matter which technology you use. At the end of the talk, I will give you the link to the repo, so you can not only play with the demo itself, but also look at the code, fork it, and do whatever you want. The other cool thing of this application is that this application is a progressive web app, so we can install it. Once we do it on a phone, it will look like a completely native app, or like in this case, I won't do it so, it will be installed as it would be a desktop application, even though it is a web application. But this is a completely another story and session. So we say that we see the page visibility first. Okay, just another word. All the demos we will see here, I want to then describe for the other APIs. We'll have an upper part with a brief description about the API, eventually some conditions, because we will see some of the other APIs are a little bit still in an experimental state, therefore there are eventually some flags or conditions we have to still fulfill or respect. In the middle, there will be, of course, the core of the demo, and last but not least, at the end, there is the browser compatibility. I start with this because it's the most supported, so to give you a very nice positive feeling. The bad news will come later. Browser compatibility is very wide for these APIs because as we can see, almost all over supported. This API is not new. Maybe already some of you already know it, but not always is used. And this is a pity because it's a really cool API. Now, let's imagine we have this video that is extremely important for our users. I start playing it, and then I will open a new tab. What I would expect is that the video will be automatically stopped as soon as I lose or I don't have the visibility anymore of this document. And then, as soon as we come back, from that very same frame, the video will automatically, or let's say automagically, start. So we start, and then I open the new tab. Another thing we can see here, it's maybe it's not super easy to read, but it's we have a pause. I made that just for the sake of demo to see that indeed the video has been paused. Now, if I go back, we can see that it played exactly from the same second we left it. So this is a very simple demo, but so easy or good to show you what are the potentiality and the possibilities of this API. Very easy to implement, yet very powerful. Let's see now what's the code behind. Again, you will see Angular framework, boilerplate or parts. Don't focus on that. They are completely not relevant. The only thing is that here we have a video element template, document template that just gives me a reference to the video. We don't need anything more than that. Then in the code part, I just listen to the visibility change event over the document object. And this is all what we need. We can see here that when this event is triggered, I can check the document object, and specifically the hidden property. True or false will give us information whether at that moment the page is visible or hidden, so minimized or a new tab has been opened. And then here we are free to do whatever we want. In our case, very simple, we invoke the pause or play, according to which state is the document hidden variable, and then over the native element object. And then we can just pause or play it again when the focus or when the document is visible again. And here, just for the demo purposes, I changed the page title to pause or play, just to make it more easy to see. So very easy, but nice to being able to play with that. Screen Wake Lock API is probably one of my favorite APIs. It's really, really cool. Typically, when we browse with our phones, or mobile devices usually go in standby after 15 or 13 seconds. Of course, even a minute if you want to set it longer, but more or less 15, 30 seconds. This API allows us to keep the lock of the device, the screen of the device, locked, so always active. Practical scenarios are, for example, a web application that shows media content so that the user simply stays there looking at the content without having to scroll to keep the screen active. Or, and I think this is the really killer feature for this application, a cooking web application or website, because we go and scroll while cooking or while following the recipe, we scroll the website, and if you are like me, I really like, according to the typical Italian stereotype, I really like cooking, and I found myself often in this condition. So think about now, your screen goes on lock, and now you have to unlock it. So yeah, not exactly the best part. But with this API, we can make it better. So to show it, I mirror, of course, my phone, and then I, with a default of 15 seconds, I will not touch it anymore. I chose this very, very long recipe just to give even a more concrete scenario. With this API, first of all, we can get the lock, you saw? Very nice, eh? Think about now, you're full of dough and so on, not very nice. Now I explicitly enable a wake lock, or I explicitly, with a gesture, so the click, I request this lock. And you will see that now I will go on talking, and the screen will remain active without me touching it and so on. So even for other APIs that we will see later, there is always a condition that either, as you can see above there, we need a secure connection, or in many cases, we need to trigger this condition or this operation after or thanks to a user gesture. In this case, the click of the checkbox could be a button or whatever. But without that, we cannot automatically or programmatically trigger or invoke the lock without the user explicitly interact with the UI. So you can see the UI or the layout is still there. When we change the page, going to a new tab and so on, we release, by default, we release the lock. So when we go back, then we should again check it. Or we can use a combination of APIs. For example, the page visibility API we saw before, so that we can remember that the user gave us or granted us the permission, and then we reacquire out of the box this permission. So as you can see, the layout is still, or the page of my phone is still active. So it didn't go standby thanks to that. Again, when we work with these APIs, it's always good to check, wake lock. Always good to check, first of all, whether the API is supported. If not, we can either transparently don't provide the functionality, or otherwise we should inform the user, please use another browser. What we do here, so when the user clicks the checkbox, so we need a user interaction for that, we invoke the request wake lock method. The request wake lock, nothing else that invoke the request method over the wake lock object and pass the screen, because at the moment is the only allowed parameter. Before, also system as a parameter was allowed, but this has been removed at the moment. So we can just lock, not the whole phone, but just the screen for the time being. But it's already quite a good achievement. And then from the moment on, the target device will stay active, so won't go idle anymore. So it could be for your project, it could be a nice thing, so that the user doesn't have to actively interact with the page as long as on the page itself. So can benefit from the content forever, or at least until the battery lasts. here, as I saw before, we can use interaction of the page visibility API again to reacquire out of the box, if have been granted before, the wake lock. We can see this in here if we open the console. So now is a wake lock acquired, and this, yes, I want even to reacquire when I go away. So I go away, I'll go back, and we can see here, wake lock has been released because I left, and then, again, wake lock has been reacquired. So we don't need, thanks to this, we don't need every time to ask the user for clicking it. Once is enough. Good. Ambient light. This is also another very, very interesting API. Ambient light sensor interface is a part of the sensor APIs that allow us to interact with the hardware of the device. Of course, the device itself must have some hardware, like, for example, capable of detect, as in this case, the light around us, or the user, or the gyroscope, and so on. So sensor APIs allow us to interact through or with a web application with the hardware sensor of the target device. In this case, we will see the ambient light sensor that is capable of detecting how much light is around us, or around, in this case, my phone, and give us information in terms of luminance to our web application. Then it's up to us to use it according to how do we want. And we will see what I thought, but maybe you might even have even better ideas. So, ambient light. Of course, in this case, my laptop doesn't have any light sensor, so we have to use again. And as you can see, it's still on here. So, if I go on or closer to a light, or in the case, a source of light, okay, my arm is not long enough, but we can see that it's increasing the light level. Then if I go, we don't have the wake lock anymore. If we go away, I made so that it detects that if we go within or under a specific threshold, I switch my web application straight and automatically in a dark mode. This could be a nice thing if you have, for example, a blog applications and detect dynamically the environment of your users, and then provide a dark mode or a bright mode accordingly, without the user having explicitly to switch and get blinded maybe at night when they read the articles in the bed. The nice thing, again, is how easy is it to implement this API. We just have to create an instance of the ambient light sensor, and then we get this sensor object. Of course, we need to grant permission from the user in order to allow us to read this information from the phone, from the sensor. And then after this permission, or if this permission has been granted, then we can start to read the ambient light around the phone. In here, we can see that we can constantly or live see the value changes or the light changes around the phone. And then we get, in terms of illuminance, so it's just a number that gives us how bright or how strong is the light around the phone. We can detect this and then do whatever we want. In this case, very easily, I fix a threshold of 50 of illuminance value, and then according to that I say, or I try to determine whether we are in a dark environment or in normal bright environment. And we can do then from that on whatever we want. In this case, I just set dark mode or bright mode. Very simple. File system access is also another very interesting API. So far, through web applications or in websites, and so if we wanted to work with the local files or open files from the file system, it always has been a kind of a pain because we have to download a file, overwrite an existing one to save it or save in a new location. Thanks to this API, we can now create a kind of a connection to the local file and then constantly save the changes straight there without having to open each time a file picker, save picker, or overwrites the file. We can even create or implement functionalities that create a kind of automatically saving operations. The APIs offer different methods in order to work with the files, to open a file picker or to open a save file picker, or to work with directories. And then according to the normal file picker, we can, for example, define which are the file extensions we want to filter or to have like a description in the file picker itself. But the cool thing is that once we select, thanks to this file picker, once we select a file, we get a so-called file handle. This file handle is very important because it gives us exactly the direct link to the physical file. Then we can get information about the file size, the file type, and so on. But also it's good because every following saving we want to do goes through this file handle without having to trigger again another file picker. An important thing to keep in mind, though, when we use this API is that all the permissions that have to be granted, like to read or to write, are not persisted. So when the page is refreshed or the user comes again to the page, all the permissions are lost. One possible improvement is that we save locally, eventually in IndexedDB, the file handle. And this will also allow us to invoke a method called query permission in order to see whether these permissions have been previously granted and then avoid having to see, as we will see, a permission pop-up. Okay. Here, I on purpose didn't show for the previous one, but here I can show a little bit of a bad note. So it's not exactly widely supported. Of course, in Chrome it's supported, is by default from version 86 on, but indeed is not exactly widely supported. So let me, first case, I just write a completely very interesting file. Then when I click on Save As, I can save it for whatever I want. Test UK DevOps. Save. Now we can see that in the browser bar, there is a new icon. This page is allowed to edit files. This means that we can now edit the files, so that is like read and write files, because we explicitly, through the save as, gave or granted permissions, read and write to this file. Now the cool thing is that edited, I can save, and the saves are straight made to the file. Let me refresh the page. We can see, once again, we lost the icon, so we lost all the permissions again. Now, if I open it, and if I found it, we can see, though, that the changes are there. So we could really create this connection, and now it's like a desktop application or something very, very intuitive, and it's very nice or as a way to increase user interaction and engaging the users more and more. If we go a completely new case, like for example, we open an existing file, this again. Now we click on Save. Now you can see that we are prompted to give write permissions, because before we made a complete, so save as, we can create completely a new file, so we granted read and write. Now we just open it So we granted read permissions, but now when we want to save, the user is prompted, yeah, are you allowing to also give write permissions? And then if yes, of course, we can go on and so on. Let's see now the code. So in here, we have the open file. This method is called when we click on the open button, and what it does is invokes the local method getFileHandle. GetFileHandle invokes the show open file picker. This is one of the API's method. We can pass options. That options are like filter which kind of file types we want to filter and so on, but it is not mandatory. And then we get an array of handles in case we selected multiple files. And this is very important because with this file handle that we should save locally, we can then get information about the file. For example, here get file, we get a file object. So we can then get information about the size, the file type, and so on. And here we keep the file handler in this context because later on, when, for example, we want to save the file, we check if the file handle is existing. If so, we can write the file, the changes we made straight to the file. Here is just a stream, so it's nothing very complex, or I won't talk about that. But the concept is that here we have this file handle, and this file handle is very cool because it gives us this direct connection between our web application and the local file without having to open every time the file picker. So it's very convenient and very easy to use. If the file handle is not here, because maybe it was not created yet, we invoke here as a fallback the save as that, of course, creates a new file, and then again we go and use the file handle locally. Web share. Nowadays, when we use more and more social media, we want always to share with our friends some cool image, text, or content. And this is a nice functionality we can provide within our web application, either a weblog or even maybe an e-commerce, when we want to allow our user to share specifically this or the other article in a very easy way. One click, and we can share, for example, the last clothes collection link via Facebook, WhatsApp, or so. The share method that we will see shortly accepts an object where we can pass a title, that is a string, a text body, of course, a string, and then URL string as well. Just one of these three properties is mandatory, but it's always a good practice to provide them all, because we don't know which native app or which application the user will use. For example, in the case of a WhatsApp, the title might not be so relevant, just the text or the URL eventually. But the same user might eventually use or choose an email application. In that case, title is very important because it will be used as a subject for the email. So as a best practice, provide them all. There are just three. There is also a new version of this API called Level 2 of the Share API that allow us to share also files, so images or files of different kind. It's very interesting because previously the web share was possible only through mobile devices. But now, even on a desktop environment, with the latest version of Chrome in this case I'm using, we can still use some local, on a desktop machine, some local application to use as a target to share these information. Here, just for the sake of the demo, I used my, as a content, for just an example, my favorite cocktails. So let's say we are a bar web application, and we want to allow our user to easily share with friends and so on the favorite cocktail recipe that we have here. We can provide a button. Again, user interaction might be needed. So we click, and now we can see at the bottom of my phone, I have a set of native applications that I can choose from in order to use as a media to share this information. I will use WhatsApp, one contact, and I send it. And here you can see we have a title here, Manhattan, for example, the body text, and then we have an URL at the end. So very easy, and so allow us to increase greatly the user engagement just with a couple of clicks. Making it very easy to share content with other applications and making so that our marketing campaign or our content of our website can have even a greater reach. Another nice thing is that it's very easy. The only thing we have to do is invoke the share method over the navigator object, and then we pass the target. Here, target is the cocktail recipe that the user clicked according to the button. And the object type of this target is a share object. Share object has a title, text, and URL, as I said. Again, if we use the newest API, we are allowed also to pass an array of files in case we want to share also images, for example, not just static content. And that's it. The browser does everything else for us. So the browser, as soon as we click the button and we invoke the share method, will provide, according to the mobile device or the desktop machine, will provide a pop-up and some of the native apps that are available to be chosen from. This is in one way. If we would implement progressive web apps, we can even provide our progressive web app application as a target so that our progressive web app would be listed at the end or at the bottom of the phone. So now I don't have anyone prepared, but it would be here at the end. So our custom progressive web app, if we use that as a target for the share, we have to provide some extra information in a manifest file, then we can have that here listed. So we could even go both ways, not only to have some native apps here, but also having our web application being able to receive data thanks to the Share API. Contact picker. This is also very interesting because so far, web application didn't have any chance to access the rubrica or the contact list on a mobile device, until now, though. Because thanks to the Contact Picker API, we can access the contact list of a phone and then select different properties like name, email, phone number, address, and the icon, of course, if they are provided. Again, in order to use this API, we need to use a secure connection, and the user has to interact with the application, so there should be a user gesture in order to being able to use it. Of course, on a desktop version, with my browser, I cannot use that, so I will again mirror my phone. So I click now the button, and then I can access all the contacts of my on my phone. I can select 2, and then we can see that we have it here. Here are, of course, just some sample cases, but we can get the name and last name, or the full name. We can get the address if provided. We can get the image. So this is very nice because, let's say, we are registering our user for newsletters, or in a case to register in our portal. And we wanted to promote our website and make it possible that maybe with providing some discount or so, the user is able to invite other customers, so other users, so with importing some email or some information. In that way, he doesn't have or she doesn't have to go every time and to copy-paste, but with just a click, we can get this information within the context of our web application. Once again, always check whether the browser is supported or not, and then we can invoke the select contact, so when I click the button. Here we can define the different properties that the user can share. In this case, I just wanted to name, address, and icon to be shared. Whether we wanted to allow to select the multiple users, and so on. Once then we invoke the select method over the contacts object, we get back the contacts object. Here we don't have any strong typing. And in here then we get all this information that the user granted or selected, like as a text, we have an array for the address because there could be multiple. We have the array of images in case the logo is provided. And then these, of course, we have to apply some logic in order to extract this information and then apply it in a proper way on our website. In this case, for example, I simply add it as a card, and then you can adjust as you want. But there is not much else here to do or to say. Again, compatibility is not the best. Yeah, it's really, really experimental still, and of course, as you might have guessed, it works mainly or only for mobile devices. But still, it's nice to keep in mind that we have nowadays already these possibilities, and why not to implement the so-called progressive enhancements. So provide in a progressive way some functionalities to users that have a very modern or the last trendy phone or devices or browser, and for the users that use a browser that is not supported yet, either inform them that this is possible, but they have to use that specific browser, or transparently don't show this functionality. The last API we will see is the vibration API. Of course, we need to have a device that is capable to vibrate, so no desktop machines, but phones are good. In this case, we can think about as a practical scenario, if, of course, web games. There are some explosions or something happen within the game, and then we wanted to let the phone shake and vibrate in order to engage even further. But this doesn't mean that we have to use only these cases. We can use, for example, when we have a huge form, and there are some maybe validation errors. We want to provide some more tactile feeling or feedback so that when the user make any error within our form, maybe the phone vibrates. Next stage maybe might be that they get a little bit of a shock, but they are not there yet. So it's just a nice thing, again, to show that we can, even through web apps, we can interact with the hardware. So creating some new scenarios and giving us, as a web developer, some new possibilities when we think, design, or implement web applications. For the demo, this is later. For the demo, I here made a wizard, very, very simple, and I won't spoil it, so I won't go through it. I leave it for later. With this API, we can define vibration patterns. So the method allows us to define an array of numbers where the numbers alternate in terms of how many milliseconds the device has to vibrate, pause, vibrate, pause. So you can be extremely creative and create the best symphony just with these vibration and pause patterns. In this case, if you give a right answer, you have 3 short vibrations. So vibration, pause, and so on. If it's wrong, there is just 1 long vibration. So very easy, but could provide some nice engaging or fun behavior. Here, correct answer, we have 100 millisecond vibrate, 30 millisecond pause, and so on. For the wrong answer, we just have 700 millisecond of unique vibration. Here there is just phone groups and blah, 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 angular, not very important. The important part is that we just need to invoke over the navigator object the vibrate method, and then we pass the pattern. That could be, as we defined before, either the wrong or the answer pattern. So it's nothing else than an array of integers. That's it. Maybe not exactly the most common scenario, but again, it's nice to have it in mind that we can use it. Last but not least, very, very interesting. Bonus is not API. They are just events. I want it just because I like the images. We can detect whether a user is online and offline, even though we have to keep in mind that this is not very accurate. If we want to be sure if the user is online and offline, we should better use service workers. It's much more accurate and precise. But this could also be okay. We are online, and now I switch off my Wi-Fi, and it should detect that we are now offline. Now I switch it on again, and as soon as the system detects that we are online, I hope that the demo won't let me down, voila. We are online again. So extremely simple, but again, we can use that to show maybe a little text message to the user, hey, you are now offline. Maybe use these plus some local caching to provide even a better experience, a much more accurate data, or we can cache and show that the user that look at the data you are seeing now is cached, so it's not live. And thanks to these events, we can detect it very easily, even though, again, not super precise. With that, or with this, okay. With that, we reach the end of the session. Here is the URL to the GitHub repo where you get the live demo, and you can even download the code if you're interested. Some media links, so feel free to follow me if you're interested in general news about web topics in general. That said, I hope you could find some of new APIs and you find the presentation interesting. If you have any questions, please go on. Or if new question will just pop up later and so on, just DM me later on when you feel inspired. Thank you very much.
You mentioned that. Yeah. You mentioned some APIs some of the APIs need user interaction.
Yep.
How is that controlled? Like, if there's a button, I can always click it through JavaScript as well, right? So how is that actually enforced?
Yeah, there is always, so some APIs indeed, as we saw, need, also for the security reason, need a user interaction, meaning that we need to have on the interface a UI element that is clickable. Could be a checkbox, could be a button. I didn't try with the scroll if that might be intended or used as a user interaction, but the concept is that we need an action from the user. So this means that through the interface, through the DOM or the template, we need there an event, a click or something that allow us or grant us in the code side to use this API. Otherwise, it will not be allowed. Yeah, there is another.
Yeah, so you mentioned the service worker was more accurate for detecting online-offline events. I guess why is it more accurate compared to the browser one, or why is the browser one more inaccurate compared to the service worker?
Because it depends. Sometimes you have a false positive. Maybe you are connected to the network, so you are online, but you don't get any data. And with the service worker, you can use also other APIs to create even more advanced scenarios, like, for example, background sync API. This is a very interesting API in the case we have a huge form, we fill it, and then the user suddenly goes offline. And then the user though doesn't know it, click on the submit, and the only thing it gets back is like, you are offline. But what we can do with this API is that we save the whole content of the form in IndexedDB, so locally. And then this background sync API, thanks also to the service worker, might allow us to detect, or allow us to detect when the user or the connectivity is online again, and then we are notified of that, thanks to a sync object. When this happens, then we can grab all the form data from the local IndexedDB and then post it.
I think you mentioned that the ambient light sensor also, or ambient light API also required permission to read from the sensor from the user. Is that you need to allow the browser to read from the sensor generally, not the specific website, or is it like location, it's for a specific website, and it pops up the first time you come on saying, we want to read your ambient light? Because that would be a little bit jarring, kind of interrupt the experience the first time that it's going to be dynamic.
Yeah, indeed, is the later you say it. So when you land on a website and so, probably in the demo you will see that as well, you have this not so nice pop-up that says, you grant, I don't know, you typically is like location permission and is always like block. But is that the case? In that side, in terms of a UX best practice, we should try to provide these, especially when we wanted to send, this is another thing, but when we send a web notification, not upfront, because otherwise 99% of users will just click block. But maybe after there is some more interaction, or when the users goes, for example, through the whole buying process to the checkout, then we can show a button and allow the user to click explicitly there to say, hey, do you want to be notified for sales discounts and so? In that case, is much more effective. Not only way more user-friendly, but also the users are more willing than indeed to receive this web notification.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It was just in the case of the ambient light one, firstly, at least as far as I'm concerned, I can't see how that could ever be a security problem. I understand getting the user's consent, but it seems a weird one to be bothered about. Not like location, anyway, certainly, stuff like that. But with that, I can't think of a UI scenario where you'd, say on a mobile, where you'd want to prompt them to then suddenly do that. The whole point of the ambient light one, I would imagine, is you've opened your phone in the dark, for example. You don't want it to prompt you before it goes to dark mode. You want it to do it straight away. Yeah. So it seems unfortunate that that one has a user check in it. I understand why, because it's a sensor reading, but yeah, it would be probably optimal if they change that in the future, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, with that one is still a very, very experimental, so there are even some trade-offs that we have to accept in order to eventually use them. But the good thing is that we have to grant it only once. Maybe we can inform the user, look, we want to provide this super cool, super new functionality, but be aware that we have to click on yes. And maybe could be an interesting approach. Maybe the user is indeed interested and then click yes, allow, and from that moment on doesn't have to grant anymore. But of course, it's absolutely not ideal, and hopefully in the future it will be improved.
Thank you.
Good, then again, if you have any other question, I'm still around. Otherwise, just reach me on Twitter. Thank you very much again.